on Thune. Senator Thune, thanks so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
Ben, always good being with you. Thank you.
So why don't you give us the update on the SAVE Act? Obviously, a lot of pressure from the White House to push that forward. What's the plan?
Well, so what we did is the House, I think, as you know, sent the Senate a bill that does two things, basically. It requires proof of citizenship in order to register to vote, and then it requires a voter ID to actually vote, on Election Day or at the ballot box. But and so that's what we got on, and that came over from the House in the form of what we call a message, which is a unique way of transmitting legislation from House to the Senate that skips a step for us, and the step that we got to skip was cloture on the motion to proceed, which is a 60-vote threshold in the Senate. So we were able to get on it yesterday. We got 51 votes to get on the bill. We will stay on it now and have the debate and the fight that I think people want to have with the Democrats over whether or not they want to defend the position of citizens or non-citizens being able to vote in American elections. So the issue I think is very straightforward and simple, and that's what we want to argue, the substance of that, and force the Democrats to defend that position. So we'll continue that. I did what we call in Senate language, filled the amendment tree. So we have a couple of votes that we have set up at some point. But at least for now, we're going to allow the debate to go and let both sides get in and mix it up. But frankly, at the end of the day, this is a very difficult, I think, position for the Democrats to have to defend. And if you honestly are defending a position that non-citizens ought to be able to vote in American elections, I think that's hard to sell the American people, which is why the American people are overwhelmingly in favor of our position.
Well, the Democrats continue to use the power of the filibuster to hold up the SAVE Act in the final vote, Senator. And obviously that's created a lot of pressures inside the Republican chamber. Now, I think that folks do need a reminder as to why the filibuster is important, because every so often, this has been happening for as long as I've been following politics, there's a push on the Republican side of the aisle when they have a majority to kill the filibuster. This seems to me radically short-sighted, given the fact that there are plenty of times in living memory, not all that long ago, when Democrats were running Congress and the presidency, and it seems to me the last thing you want to do is give up the power of the filibuster, and the Democrats can then turn around and use against you the minute that they're in power.
That's correct. And historically, as you know, Ben, the filibuster has protected conservative principles and priorities way more than it has Democrats. And Democrats typically, if you look throughout history, have had majorities in the House and the Senate more frequently than Republicans. And so, the idea of enabling all the things that they would do if they were able to nuke the legislative filibuster and pass their agenda with 51 votes. You'd start with, adding Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. as states. You'd go to expanding the Supreme Court. You'd federalize our elections. You'd have a wealth tax. You'd have, you'd have abortion on demand. I mean, there's so many things that the Democrats would do if that happened. And so it's important. I mean, people, and the other thing is, and this is probably the more practical consideration that we're dealing with right now, right here, is that the Republicans in the Senate, by big majority, support the legislative filibuster for that reason. And they understand how it's protected us in the past. It's a feature of the Senate that goes back to the country's founding. The Senate was designed to be a place to give the minority a voice in our lawmaking process. It's a way that the founders divided power in the Article I branch of the government between the House and the Senate. So there's a lot of support for the legislative filibuster, and frankly, the only way you would get the SAVE Act passed absent Democrat support would be to nuke the legislative filibuster, and the votes aren't there to do that. It's a function of math, and I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but that's the reality that we have to deal with.
And Senator Thune, what do you make of the argument that some people have put forward that as soon as Democrats are in control, they're going to nuke the legislative filibuster, so you may as well preemptively nuke the legislative filibuster? Does that just sort of ignore how the Senate in actuality works? I understand that everybody thinks that partisan polarization means Democrats will automatically go to the extreme. What do you make of that position?
Well, first off, they have to have the House, the Senate, and the White House in order to make that actually a workable proposition. And if we do our jobs right, we ought to be able to keep control of the House, Senate, and the White House. But notwithstanding that, that is the argument that's the argument, frankly, that President Trump makes on a regular basis. And it's perhaps the hardest one to defend. But I would also say, and this is the view that I think most Senate Republicans share, and somebody has described it this way: at some point, the Democrats may try to steal the car, but we're not going to hand them the keys. And I think, if the Republicans were to go down that path and enable all the bad stuff the Democrats are going to do when they get the chance to do it, that's not something that we want to have our fingerprints on. Now, it's possible that the Democrats will do this when they have the majorities, and they may not. I mean, they tried to do it a couple of years ago, and they had a couple of them that blocked it. And I think there are Democrats that I've talked to, at least, who share the view that the filibuster serves an important purpose in the Senate. And now, whether or not they continue to hold that view, if they ever have the majorities in the White House, I don't put a lot of stock in that. But I do think that that's a hypothetical. And what we're dealing with right now is reality. And the reality is there aren't the votes in the Senate among Senate Republicans to nuke the filibuster and to move everything to a 51 vote threshold. So an issue like the SAVE Act, which is very popular with the American people, and I wouldn't say unanimously supported by Republicans in the Senate, but near unanimously supported. When we get a vote on it, it's going to take some Democrats to vote with us. And who knows, maybe there'll be one over in the course of the debate, but this is an issue on which they feel very strongly too. And they've made it abundantly clear that they're not going to cooperate or help in any way Republicans pass it. But I think it's an important debate to have. I think it puts everybody on the record. And this is an issue of, free and safe and secure elections in this country. And we ought to do everything we can to ensure that that's the case.
Well, Senator Thune, speaking of safety and security, obviously Democrats continue their partial government shutdown with regard to the Department of Homeland Security. This seems absolutely insane to me. We have TSA delays all over the country. And beyond that, we also have Iran, the leading state sponsor of terrorism on planet Earth, that the president and the military are thoroughly shellacking right now, that seem to be interested in activating lone wolf terrorists or assassination groups or terrorist attacks on American soil. And the DHS is partially unfunded because of the Democrats. Is that going to come to an end? Well, what are Democrats doing here?
They are, I think, defending the indefensible, and that is trying to defund law enforcement, the very law enforcement that protects the homeland, Customs and Border Patrol, and Immigration and Customs Enforcement, two agencies. And that's what this is all about. I mean, they just want to defund those agencies. And I think that becomes a very dangerous position for all the reasons that you mentioned. We live in a dangerous world. We've got, we're involved now in Iran. We're already seeing evidence and activity in this country spurred by Iran and jihadist groups and terrorist groups that are funded by Iran. And I think, in order to avoid more of that kind of thing, we've got to make sure that we have these agencies that protect us from those types of attacks and incidents in this country funded. The Democrats, at least right now, are blocking that. And I just think this, in the end, Ben, this is a very hard position if you're a Democrat to defend. They've tried it before. They've kind of gone down that defund the police, defund law enforcement track, and it didn't work so well for them. And that's essentially what this is. Now, we've got other agencies in that Department of Homeland Security, like TSA, like Coast Guard, like FEMA, that are really important as well. And but the Democrats, as long as they hold this bill hostage, are holding all of those functions of our government hostage, and seeing that a lot of those employees aren't getting paid. It's an unsustainable position, and it all comes back to the Trump derangement syndrome. They hate the president. They're blinded by their hatred of him, and and they don't want to do anything to fund ICE or Customs and Border Patrol. And I think that's a losing hand for them in the end. But they seem to think they're winning politically right now, which is why I think they've adopted that position.
Well, that is Senate Majority Leader John Thune. Senator Thune, really appreciate your time and your insight. Keep up the good fight.
Appreciate it. Good talk to you. Thanks, Ben.